actually abolished, because obviously the voters are still there, the land is still there, but there will be substantial redistribution. And obviously in a place like the Northwest, where the population has been in relative decline, there are going to be too fewer seats. So some seats are going to be very substantially affected.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. That's Lord Hayward, the Conservative peer and polling expert. Well, coming up in the next couple of minutes, we are going to convene our cross-question panel for tonight, the first of this week. Rachel Johnson will be with us, my fellow LBC presenter. Shabnam Nasimi will be joining us, the Director of Conservative Friends for Afghanistan. Professor Linda Yueh from Oxford University, she's a professor in economics. She'll be here too. And the children's author and poet Michael Rosen will be joining us. They're waiting for your questions. Lots and lots of different subjects today, many of which we've covered in the news hour. So the number to call, 0345 6060 973. Don't forget you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC website, YouTube channel, Facebook and Twitter feed. So join us in a couple of minutes for Cross Question.
On your radio, on Global Player and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, rebel Tory MPs have secured an emergency debate over cuts to Britain's overseas aid budget. Earlier, the Speaker ruled out an attempt to amend unrelated legislation to require the government to restore the commitment to spend 0.7% of national income on aid. But the Commons has now backed a 3-hour debate tomorrow. Our Westminster correspondent Ben Kentish says it won't be easy for the government.
Conservative MP after Conservative MP standing up to criticise the government and their plan to cut foreign aid spending. There won't be a vote at the end of it. There won't be a binding vote. So it will be embarrassing for the government, but it won't yet force them to change tack.
25 to 29-year-olds in England, around 2.7 million people, can book their first COVID vaccine from tomorrow. The Health Secretary has also asked experts to decide whether 12 to 17-year-olds should receive the Pfizer jab after it was approved by the UK regulator for that age group. UK and US aviation bosses have called on world leaders to make opening up the skies a priority when they meet at the G7 summit in Cornwall this weekend. The heads of BA, Virgin, Delta and United, among others, have held a joint news conference. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 8 points at 70.77. The pound buys $1.41 and €1.16. And the weather, a fine and dry night for most. Showers in the east dying out through the evening. Patchy rain in northwest Scotland and a low of 7 Celsius. From Global's newsroom, I'm Tim Humphrey.
This is LBC. From Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening to you. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Welcome to Monday's edition of Cross Question. Let me introduce my panel to you. Michael Rosen is children's author and poet. Linda Yueh is Professor of Economics at Oxford University. Shabnam Nasimi is Director of the Conservative Friends of Afghanistan. And you all know the other panellist, Rachel Johnson, my fellow LBC presenter. So, time to get your questions in. Lots on the board so far, actually. 0345 6060 973, and you can watch our proceedings on Global Player on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk or the YouTube, Facebook or Twitter feeds.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's start with Alan in Edinburgh. Alan, hi, what's your question, please?
Hi. My question is that given the reluctance of some MPs to reduce the foreign aid budget, under what circumstances would this country have to suffer to reduce the foreign aid budget by 0.2% for more funds for ourselves?
Michael Rosen.
That's an impossible, because it's such a hypothetical about how much we should lose. I mean, there are a lot of mystifications about what government money is anyway. I heard an MP just the other day on the radio talking about the public purse. It's been quite clear over the last year or so that if the government wants to make money, if that's how we're going to call it, they do. They have a way of shuffling funds from the right pocket to the left pocket by using the Bank of England, which is basically the government anyway, in spite of the spurious stuff about being independent. So a government that has its own currency has a way of producing money, if that's what we're going to call it, when it chooses to, which of course it has done in the emergency of the pandemic. So when we talk about whether we can or can't afford things and whether there's stuff in the public purse or not, the metaphor is wrong. The government doesn't have a purse, it has currency. You know, it can't run out of its own currency because it makes it. Now, there are certain restrictions on that in terms of what the American economists called the bond fairies. But, you know, we have to be quite clear that it isn't really our money that's being spoken for here. The government has means to produce what we call money. So I sort of reject the question in a way, because it's asking something that doesn't really take place.
I'm taking it that you don't agree that the foreign aid budget should be cut.
Well, I'll take the words of Andrew Mitchell. What was he? He was the International Development Secretary, I think, in 2010. And he said that the moment we cut, then what happens? Our projects cancelled, clinics closed, and teachers sacked. Well, if we just take those three things, the idea that we collectively as a country are responsible for those things happening right now, then this sounds appalling to me. And this is just at a moment when we have a global problem we're facing, where the illness that I've suffered from, COVID, it doesn't respect national boundaries. This illness affects every single one of us, and we have to make sure that, just as Gordon Brown has said, at the end of the day, we need to have everybody in the world vaccinated and with the means to do so. So if that means sustaining the budget, then that indeed is part of one of the reasons why we need to do it, along with what Andrew Mitchell said.
I feel I should come to a professor of economics at this point, Linda. What's your answer to the question? If the global pandemic isn't enough to cut the foreign aid budget, what is? And just addressing Michael's point there about where the money comes from.
You mentioned bond fairies. I was thinking bond vigilantes is the other phrase, where sort of bond markets monitor what government spending is and how money that's printed is used. I think on the question of this commitment of 0.7% of gross national income, now I'm pretty certain the UK was one of the few countries globally that actually adhered to it. And the cut to 0.5% is because of the stretch on public finances due to COVID. And I think probably one point that Michael raised, which I would emphasize, is on the one hand, you do have this massive pressure on spending, not just to address the pandemic at home, but to make sure that people are supported and viable businesses are supported. And there is a huge need within the country. At the same time, the UK is already committing funds to help with global health, because if the pandemic is not eradicated everywhere, then we will continue to be affected by it to some extent. I think something like 130 countries haven't had a single vaccination yet. So if you take both of those things in context, plus the fact that if you were to say step back and reduce the spending on overseas aid, it's how you do it. So in other words, is it about discontinuing existing projects, or is it not funding new projects? Is there a way of aligning the spending with the overall aims of supporting global public health? Climate change is another initiative the UK is committed to spending on. So in other words, is there a more joined up way of connecting what we're spending overseas to support global public health, to support the kinds of things that position the UK both for its own, both for our own benefit in terms of the climate, in terms of the pandemic, but also, doesn't disrupt poverty reduction programs, which are obviously a main focus of the ODA. overseas development assistance. So I think it's the how you do it, and thinking about it holistically is probably what I would suggest. Because the other thing about focusing on linking that spending to the overall UK's trade and investment policy and all those different ways of linking aims, and we all know that our recovery is also going to be helped by having greater access to overseas markets, having exports contributing as we all recover. So I think, to me, those are the kinds of things which I hope MPs will debate, because I understand the Speaker is pushing the government to have a debate on this.
OK, Rachel Johnson, what we're talking about here is effectively £4 billion. Now, governments, when they're elected, they say what they're going to spend money on, and this was a Conservative election manifesto commitment. Where do you stand on this?
I think that the issue is really one for the domestic audience. I think the way that this Prime Minister has binned off the manifesto pledge introduced by David Cameron, a former Prime Minister, it's a sort of dog whistle. As you say, it's £4 billion, but if you actually work out the share of corporation tax receipts that 0.2% represents, in fact, it's a lot bigger. The sums involved are actually quite large. And I think at this point in the spending round, you can see why the government wants to give a strong signal to the spending departments that the magic money tree has, as it were, stopped flowering. And also there's an existential threat to the nation's finances. I like what Michael said, but the truth is that if Joe Biden overexpands, I think the $6 trillion recovery fund could spook the bond vigilantes and the bond, what did you call them, Michael?
It's Paul Krugman's phrase, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, bond fairies.
I think what we're seeing is this foreign aid cut being used as a message to the big spending departments that everybody's going to have to tighten their belts, especially if global inflation takes off, which would wreak havoc with the public finances even more. So I think that's what we're seeing. I think that they could come to some sort of compromise tomorrow, because $4 billion doesn't sound like a lot when you set it against the $400 billion this government has spent on the pandemic.
You said earlier that the Prime Minister was blowing a dog whistle. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think that, if you think about it, the supplicants for billions are queuing around the block, social care, educational recovery, the 5 million people on NHS waiting lists waiting for treatment and surgeries, furlough, calls to extend furlough until September, maybe beyond. We'll probably have to bail out the travel industry and the tourist industry. So given that, you can see why the government is at the moment digging in its heels, and you've got people like Andrew Bridgen defending this cut.
I think, if I could just come in, I think Rachel's being a bit coy about the dog whistle answer there, because I know what she meant, which is that before the last election, there were a lot of trumpetings from the right, demanding indeed that the foreign aid budget should be cut. So perhaps the dog whistle that we're skirting around here is the fact that there's a nod to the fact that, charity begins at home. We should sort ourselves out before we sort out all those beastly foreigners.
Something I agree with, by the way.
No, but I think if Iain is using that phrase, dog whistle, then, or you're using it, then that's what I think's going on.
I think you may be right. And I think polls show that 2/3 of voters support. This is the most popular, this is the only popular spending cut that the government has ever suggested or brought in.
Yes, but then
I'm not sure. Sorry, Michael. I'm not sure it's fair to classify this as a left-right issue, because you've got some of the leading rebels on this are actually from the right of the Tory party. Edward Lee, David Davis. They're not exactly bleeding heart liberal voices in the Tory party, are they? Shabnam Nasimi, let me come to you. Let's go back to the original question. If a global pandemic isn't enough to cut the foreign aid budget, what is?
Look, I think breaking our commitment to the world's poorest and most vulnerable is a very big deal. And I think it's worth a very important discussion. The cuts proposed amount to roughly a third of the aid budget. So if applied across the board, it will mean a third fewer children immunized each year, saving about 100,000 fewer lives. It will mean 1 million fewer children per year supported through education, 2 million fewer per year reached with emergency assistance crisis. So I think the devastating impact that such a cut would have is a reminder of the phenomenal impact that UK aid makes. However, I am also a believer that aid isn't the way to sort of bring sustainable change to the developing world. As sort of working on Afghan affairs and very directly with a country like Afghanistan, which is very much foreign aid dependent, the state will practically collapse if aid stops. Now, what it means is that the country can never stand on its own feet. It also means that countries like Afghanistan and many others that have corrupt governments, aid does not actually reach people in the way that it should. And it's commonly known that the money that is sent to those countries is pocketed by officials. So I think it's more about finding ways, better ways.
That has been true in the past, but you do not think that actually in recent years that has been stamped down on? The aid money doesn't go to individual governments anymore. Most of it goes through NGOs, and I'm sure that there's corruption in those too. But I think sometimes people overplay that argument here nowadays.
Yes and no. I think what's more important than anything, it's that even the 0.5% aid can go a long way if it's administered in the right way. But more importantly, aside from aid, I think trade is an important angle here as well. With global Britain and start of trade relationships with sort of countries around the world, it's ever more important now to develop relationships with poorer countries. It creates more sustainable change to people's economic situation. And it can fix, aid is a short-term fix. We need to look for long-term fixes. And if we are serious about global Britain and the relationship that Britain has with the world and its commitment to support the sort of poorer countries, it's through trade that we can do that. And I think we emphasize on aid too much. There are more practical and sustainable, longer ways that we can support the world's sort of poorest.
OK, let's go back to our caller, Alan in Edinburgh. Alan, I'm not sure you've got definitive answers to your question there, but what's your own answer to your question?
Well, my own, I'm very grateful for the first person to answer the question who said, and I wrote it down, it's not our money anyway. As I sit here doing my tax return, I shall take that information on board.
That's why I love this programme.
Yeah, there are several views of what is government money. There isn't just one view. We've been given one view that government money is equivalent to, the famous handbag metaphor or the public purse, and we pay our taxes and so on. There are other views as to what actually government money is. And certainly if this last year is anything to go by, we actually saw a manifestation of the money tree. The government produced money at levels at which we were told the whole financial world would collapse if government spent at that rate. But they didn't collapse and they found the money. We know there is this thing called quantitative easing. It's very rare that you ever hear in the mass media as to how quantitative easing works. But it does seem to be that, as far as we can make out from the outside, that what happens is that governments require their currency makers, the banks, to produce bonds, which then the government buys, or vice versa. It's largely a kind of mystery to us on the outside. But money is produced by a combination of the government and its bank, and they do that in Europe as well, and America does it too, because they're currency makers. We sit here at home with our mortgages and our debts when we lend each other money, and it is nothing like that for government. It isn't how they operate at all. They can sit at keyboards and make this stuff.
Michael, you'll be delighted to know that a couple of years ago, I did a whole hour's phone-in on quantitative easing, which, believe you me, I was a bit nervous about doing, but we had a full switchboard the whole hour, believe it or not.
I bet you did.
Anyway, Alan, thank you very much for your call. We'll come to more of your calls in just a moment with our panel on Cross Question. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
21 minutes past 8, you're listening to or watching Cross Question with Rachel Johnson, my fellow LBC colleague, Shabnam Nasimi. By the way, Rachel Johnson's podcast, Difficult Women, I was listening to your podcast on the drive in today, Rachel, where you were interviewing Camilla Tominey. You are a fantastic interviewer, if I may say so.
Oh, thank you. Well, Iain, I mean, that coming from the master, I'm taking that. Thank you so much.
Anyway, group hug. Shabnam Nasimi is director of the Conservative Friends of Afghanistan. Professor Linda Yueh is Professor of Economics at Oxford University. And Michael Rosen is here too, children's author and poet. Right, let's go to Matt in Manchester. Hello, Matt. What would you like to ask?
Is it good management to bring political statements into once-in-a-lifetime chances to win a tournament?
So you're referring to what? Gareth Southgate talking about the players taking the knee?
Yeah, and his sort of support of it and sort of taking it with them when they didn't really need to.
Okay. I mean, it has become quite politicised, this, even though the players who talk about it say this is not a political statement, that this is purely drawing people's attention to the fact that all races are equal. Obviously, there was some booing at the two friendly matches that England have had over the past week. Rachel Johnson, what do you make of this?
I do think this is a very difficult subject, and I'm aware that this has been discussed and debated at length over the last couple of days on this station. Quite rightly, as it's a very important subject. I don't know what to say, really. I do think it should be up to the individual players whether they do take a knee. And it was interesting that Wilfried Zaha declined to take the knee amongst his teammates because he said it was a pointless gesture as it hadn't achieved anything. That is a very powerful statement that I think we should all take note of as we talk about this subject. If black players like Wilfried Zaha are not doing it, and even Times leaders are saying that the gesture has outlived its usefulness, that is actually a recognition that the problem continues. And it's really not enough for players to take the knee. The Football Association has got to do a heck of a lot more to eradicate racism in its fans. It can't be impossible using face recognition, using audio recognition to actually identify the players who are ruining the game and enforcing the authorities to turn it into a political. Every match has to have the gesture before as a sort of tick box exercise before kickoff. I don't think it's working, but I don't think that the game has eradicated the problem. So I don't think we can say we've got to get rid of the gesture because it triggers the gammons, because that's not a good enough reason to stop doing it. So that's where I am on it. Maybe not very clear, but that's my current position.
Okay, Shabnam.
Look, I think the English football players made it clear that, as like you said, that taking the knee was an individual choice that many participants wanted to sort of use as a gesture of highlighting inequality and injustice experienced by the black community. And I think whilst no country will ever be perfect, I think you can never take into account the matter of black community rights out of the question. I think UK can be held up as one of the most tolerant and diverse countries in the world. Football, more sports generally, has come a long way with regard to tackling racism over the last generation or so. I do think, though, that action speaks louder than gestures like this when it comes to tackling issues of racial injustice. It has become too much of a token gesture in many regards, and makes people think that as long as we, take a knee or upload a black image on our social media profiles or a number of other things, it will fix the problem. It does not. And in my personal opinion, I think it actually makes the matter worse in many cases because it reduces a quite widespread issue into a tokenistic approach. But
that's an argument for doing nothing. It's an argument for doing nothing at all. Surely professional footballers are role models, particularly to many of the fans who go to watch football matches. Surely it was a good thing that they did this. Now, you can have an argument about, well, should it have finished at the end of the season or whatever, but that's surely it was a good thing initially.
Well, the FA and other football authorities have held many previous anti-racism campaigns before, which have been well received and welcomed by all. I think it's about refreshing those campaigns and tackling racism more subjectively to the issues that we face here in the UK. What the US, sort of countries like US and other countries around the world that have issues around racism, it's not the same problem that we face in the UK, and that was reflective in the protests, BLM protests last year. We can't take the same approach everywhere, but more importantly, I would probably like to see a story of championing success and talking about the opportunities that we can open for young Black communities and young Black people, particularly in sport. So, find something we can all support and ditching ridiculous empty gestures, to be honest. I'd like to see action more. Like I said, we hide behind these token approaches that do very little, and there's a lot more action that can take place.
Linda, you.
I think the attention being drawn by taking the knee, I think that is the individual player's choice. I was watching the game this weekend, and I think the England manager, Gareth Southgate, essentially said, this is the decision that they've taken. But I strongly agree that it needs to be linked to actions. So Kick It Out, which is the organization which is trying to promote, obviously, inclusion and have a zero tolerance to racism in the sport. I think it's got to be the actions that link to what taking the knee symbolizes. I mean, that's how the success of these gestures should be judged. But I think Gareth Southgate he also said something along the lines of, they get booed, and it's obviously, an issue that, that is one of the challenges of this, which is the communication of what the symbolism or gesture is to what it is they would like to see. I mean, I think a lot of that, probably still needs to be done.
Because Michael Rosen, that was, awful when you have a crowd of only 10,000 people. As Rachel said, that there is CCTV. You would think the people who were booing could be identified. But I just wonder if this had happened a year ago, at the beginning of the pandemic. But imagine that full crowds were at football matches and the players took the knee in front of a full crowd. I just dread to think what might have happened then.
Yes, but I'm a football fan. I've been going to football for years, and I've stood on the terraces amongst people shouting racist abuse at players, Black players from the other side, even though their side, our side, has had Black players. There has been racism in the game, whether at that level or indeed at the level of the way in which clubs choose people to play or indeed to manage. There have been scandals of managers saying racist things. So we know that the problem, there is a problem in the game. It's no different from anywhere else. I should declare an interest. I'm part of an organisation called Show Racism the Red Card. And I've sat and listened to people like Leroy Rossenia and John Barnes and Shaka Hislop talking about the kinds of racism they experienced and go on experiencing, even though they're not playing in the game anymore, and know that it's still present. And that's why they're part of that organisation. Now, whether we're saying that gesture is tokenistic or not, well, of course, people like me think action is necessary. I don't believe the gesture is tokenistic. There's a long and very proud tradition to the gesture. I'm old enough to remember Martin Luther King taking the knee in the middle of those incredible actions in the fight for civil rights in America. That's where it comes from, though it was Colin Kaepernick in 2016 who, as it were, revived it and put it into sport because he felt directly that there was racism in the game. But I go with what Jordan Henderson said. I mean, here we have an England captain who's not Black himself saying we know what's right and we stand together against racism, and that's the end of the story, really. Well, this is new and to my ears wonderful that an England captain, all right, temporary captain for the day, for that part of the game, saying something like this, acknowledging that there is a problem, and there is a problem because football is supposed to be about a level playing field. It's where the metaphor comes from. They're all supposed to be on the same playing field, equals playing this game. And that is supposedly what's wonderful about sport. So when we find in the midst of it there is racism, and these are the players are telling us, I mean, or even indeed in the commentary boxes. I mean, if people had seen Ian Wright just reading to Alan Shearer on Sky or BT, whichever it was, the other day, reading the kind of abuse that he gets. So sadly and tragically, this stuff is alive and well in the public discourse. And so this taking the knee, it may well be unpopular with people who either don't like it just because they don't like it, let's say, but also there'll be plenty of racists who don't like it because of the statement it's making. White and black players, to put it crudely, are kneeling side by side on the pitch saying, this is what we stand for. Black lives do matter. Up until recently, we have a sense that black lives haven't mattered enough. So we're saying it can matter on the pitch now, and we're making that gesture. But of course, every person I know in Show Racism the Red Card or in Kick It Out, of course, they're desperate for action. I know they are.
Well, well done for bringing two West Ham players into that list of players you've got there. It's called sucking up to the presenter, I think. Shabnam, you wanted to get
even though I'm an Arsenal fan, it's tragic, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I know, very tragic at the moment.
Isn't there a different way to do that? Why do we need to take the approach of kneeling, taking a knee? I mean, I'm sure there's a British way that we can show equality on the playing field. I think it's just also about finding a unique perspective for ourselves of how we're not only just using the gesture of equality, but also putting it into practice. So I think for a lot of people who are opposing it, potentially is that why don't we find something that fits us as a nation rather than lead something that's from outside?
I would doubt whether people are objecting to it because it's American. You know, we don't object to a lot of things about. There's a lot of things that America does that we adore and love, music and culture and film and so on. I can't believe people sincerely feel, oh, I don't like this because it's American. I mean, it will do. Martin Luther King is a world figure that I, for one, and many others look up to as a giant of the 20th century. So if that's where the gesture comes from, and I believe it does, then I say, 4 cheers for that.
OK, thank you very much. More questions to come too. Rachel Johnson, Shabnam Nasimi, Linda Yueh and Michael Rosen in just a few moments' time. It's 8:33, news headlines with Tim Humphrey.
Rebel MPs have secured an emergency Commons debate on cuts to Britain's overseas aid budget. A group of Conservative backbenchers had wanted to force a binding vote tonight, but their amendment was rejected. From tomorrow, anyone aged 25 and over in England can receive their first coronavirus jab in what the NHS has described as the final lap in the vaccine programme. The Health Secretary says inoculations are breaking the previously rock-solid link between infections and hospital admissions. The heads of aviation companies are urging world leaders to prioritise opening up the travel corridor between the UK and the US when they meet at the G7 summit this week. It coincides with thousands of British people trying to get back from Portugal before it's put on the amber list at 4 tomorrow morning. And the weather, a dry and fine night for most. Showers in the east dying out through the evening. Patchy rain in northwest Scotland and a low of 7 degrees.
This is LBC.
I want to
Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:37. Michael Rosen, Linda Yueh, Shabnam Nasimi and Rachel Johnson with me, taking your calls, hopefully answering your questions. Janet in Wimbledon is next. Hi, Janet.
Oh, hello. Thanks for taking my call.
Hello. What would you like to ask?
Yes, I'd like to ask, why is there so much reluctance for people to give 12 to 18-year-olds the COVID jab? There are children that have had long COVID, and there are few children that have died. And a teenager called sometime few days ago and said they had the HPV jabs, meningitis jabs. I had that in university, the meningitis jabs. Apart from a few discomfort, I know people are worried about side effects. But don't you think that it would be much more, responsible to give them the jabs? I just find it very difficult to think that he's going to kill them or something like that. I mean,
all right. Well, let's boil it down to asking and I guess the essence of your question is, why are people so nervous about giving children the COVID vaccine? Well, I should explain, none of us are epidemiologists or virologists, but Rachel Johnson, you have children. I can't remember what age they are, but does this make you nervous?
I talked about this with my producer Lucy last night, because she's younger than my daughter. And I said that I was very gung-ho about the vaccine, but I see the vaccine as a gateway to freedom and having no COVID restrictions and no COVID passports. So I see it in that way. And therefore, I haven't dug down mentally, really, on the possible likelihood of there being any side effects, given that they haven't done any longitudinal studies yet. For example, women of childbearing age haven't been vaccinated and produced a baby because the pandemic hasn't been going on long enough for us to assess whether there are any impacts as to fertility and so on both men and women. So I've chosen to park that because two of my sons have been vaccinated. One of them has asthma and my husband was shielding, so they were offered the vaccine and they took it. My daughter hasn't been offered the vaccine yet, but now she will be because she's in the age group, because she's in her 20s. And I think it's her choice. Luckily, I don't have to choose for her. I hope she does take the vaccine because, that we need to reach a point where 90% of the country has the antibodies, either from having had the virus or the vaccine. So she's part of the solution if she takes the vaccine. And when I say things like this on broadcast media, you cannot imagine how much flack I get from the anti-vaxxers.
No, I really can.
Oh, yes, you can. I get accused of promoting of gene therapy, and that I'm, of maybe destroying the likelihood of children to reproduce and all the rest of it. And, as you said at the beginning, I'm not a virologist, I'm not an epidemiologist. I have to trust that the regulators have stress tested this vaccine for all age groups. And we have to accept when they say it's fit to be used on the younger ones, that they are telling us the truth as far as they can.
Linda.
I think as far as I can recall, in America, they've offered the vaccines to over 12s. So I think the reason is what Rachel had pointed out. And yes, thank you, Iain, for just reminding all your listeners, none of us are epidemiologists or virologists. So this is all. But
that doesn't mean that we can't. That doesn't mean we can't have a view, though, does it? Because one of the guests on last week's show came under fire. Said, "Well, why have you invited him on to talk about this? He's not a virologist." And I said, "No, but we're all entitled to a view, an informed view, hopefully."
Yeah. I was just about to caveat that with the informed part. So I think we all follow this, all pretty closely. Obviously, it's dramatically affected our lives. So I think in America, they've offered it to over 12s. I think the anxiety originally was that the research was done not on children. And so I think that plus the fact that it was, that plus risk, I think, were some of the reasons, obviously, for kind of a delayed rollout. So, of course, I think, there's always, I think a lot of people actually live in in a sense of anxiety throughout the pandemic anyways. But I think that might be one of the reasons. And that's why I was sort of trying to caveat it, because I think in the United States, they have rolled that out. And I do know a number of people who have obviously, pointed, I think Rachel also mentioned this, that if you need to get to a certain percentage of the population, then it's got to be the under 18s. It's going to have to be essentially most of the population before, we achieve that percentage. So if there are epidemiologists or virologists listening and I got that bit wrong, apologies.
Okay, Michael Rosen, what's your view?
I'll declare an interest rate away again, just in case people will say, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? And that is that I had a son who died of meningitis C, that if he had received the jab that became universal, he would have lived. And in fact, he was part of the reason why the jab came in, because there was a little bit of kerfuffle around the time that he died, and I was on the radio talking about it. So I'm obviously fairly pro-vaccine, but just to deal with the he would, wouldn't he argument. Look, every day of our lives, we live in a society where we are trusting people we can't see to have produced materials, processes, whatever, by the scientific method, and we believe in it. I'm sitting here with a light on in front of me. We have boilers, we have houses, everything around our lives. We are not hunter-gatherers. Everything around our lives is constructed because we trust what scientists do according to the scientific method of hypothesis, experiment, trial, and that's what we do. Now, yes, there have been some corners cut on this occasion because of the dire emergency we were in. Declare another interest, I got COVID. And so, we put our trust, exactly as Rachel said, we put our trust in the scientists because that's what we do every day of the week. With every minute of our lives, we do that. And this is what they have told us. They are telling us that this vaccine is as safe as vaccines ever are, if not safer. And so I've had the 2 jabs. I hope that we can move towards universal vaccination. We virtually eradicated polio from most of the world through vaccination. In my lifetime, I've seen people crippled or indeed die because of polio. So I'm a great believer in vaccination, just as I'm a believer in electric lights and indeed the internal combustion engine. Though, of course, that's being revised right now, even as we speak. Indeed. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Indeed it is. Shabnam, I think I'm right in saying that you're the youngest person on the panel. When you talk to I'm not going to ask how old you are, when you talk to your friends about this, are they eager to get the vaccine, or is there a certain degree of maybe scepticism, complacency, whatever?
Well, there was a lot of vaccine hesitation at the beginning, and I think personally I would say the same, that when it first came out and my turn came to take the vaccine, and I've taken the first dose, there was a lot of hesitation as to what the impact will be. But with any vaccine, there are going to be a few downsides in terms of individuals who have other health issues. It may impact them differently. But I think the key word from all the panelists here today is trust. We do have to find a way of trusting the health system and our scientists, because at the end of the day, everyone wants to be able to get out of this pandemic and the lockdown as soon as possible, and the impact that it has. And particularly with youth, I think it has been said that young people spread the symptoms of COVID more widely because of school and socializing. So it's even more important for them to be vaccinated so that they don't spread the symptoms of COVID to sort of people within their family and people who have other health issues, particularly the elderly. So understandably, there have always been hesitations, and particularly within the ethnic minority community over the last couple of months, there's been a lot of conspiracy theories and myths and things that have been spread around the fact that the vaccine is a chip or is changing people's genes and DNA, and what it's set out to do is that the government's trying to spy on people. I mean, it's ridiculous notions that a lot of people seem to buy. But at the end of the day, I think the key here is it's a vaccine, and there are many other vaccines that we've trusted when it comes to youth, particularly kids that are vaccinated in schools for a number of other health conditions. And this is going to be just one of another one that we've got to add to the list.
Well, there's been quite a lot of agreement on the panel on many of the issues we've talked about so far. I think that's about to change in the next couple of minutes. You're listening to Cross Question. It's 8:47.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 10:09. It's amazing what our guests talk about during the commercial breaks. I gather they were all having a conversation about scones just now, which unfortunately I couldn't eavesdrop, but we'll have to get the technology to make that work in future. Right, next caller is Simon in Southampton. Hello, Simon.
Hello. My question is it scones or scone? No, I'm only joking.
No.
Right. Good evening. Grip onto something tight, Ian, because you're not going to like this. We've got a looming unemployment crisis. We've got a looming homelessness and eviction crisis. We've got a looming mental health crisis. And we've also got, going forward, more and more automation. Does the panel agree that now is the time for universal basic income or a form of it?
You're a cheerful chappie, aren't you, Simon? Linda Yueh, now, I'm sure this is something that you've studied over the years. Could it work?
Can I have the scones versus scone question? No, just kidding.
It's scone.
It is. There you go. Rachel's only answered
Don't start.
I actually think it is time. I think universal basic income, believe it or not, it's been talked about, for probably, I look at economic history in my latest book, and, there are lots of instances where you think about what John Maynard Keynes predicted we would be in about 2030. He thought that we would have solved the economic problem, and there's no reason to work more than 15 hours per week or something. And that's premised on once you, I think, get to a certain I would say, with all the different pressures that are going together, Maynard Keynes was obviously, describing reaching a standard of living. But I think your caller is absolutely right in pointing out, with automation, which it can complement work, employment, obviously, but there will also be displacement. There's a lot of pressures and a lot of disruptions which are coming through. So it's probably not a coincidence that universal basic income, in terms of experiments, a number of these are actually being funded by Silicon Valley tech giants. I think that, or we're going to have to tax robots if automation starts to become a bigger part of the labor force. I think that was actually the Bill Gates proposal. But I think, UBI, obviously, different experiments have happened. I can think of several, around Europe. The biggest, I think, questions to sort of explore are affordability and what is the minimum level of income that would be, that you could sustain a standard of living. And those are the kinds of things the experiments are trying to ascertain. And I would probably say most of the findings are that it doesn't discourage work, which is actually one of the reasons why you do these experiments, is that if you are able to give people a UBI, some places think of it as replacing welfare, but even just UBI is a basic level of income.
But am I not right in thinking Finland did a trial of this, didn't they? And they didn't carry on with it. Presumably there must have been a reason that they didn't carry on with it.
Yeah, so it generally speaking, it's around affordability. So if we think about it ourselves, what is a level of income that you would require for you to be able to pursue, life as you wished it? And so, that
at least $1 million a year.
Yeah. And so that plus, as I say, I think what the experience has shown is that, there is no disincentive on work. I don't think that's the issue. But where it has been tried, the state has generally thought maybe it's unaffordable. And okay. I don't remember exactly the findings from Finland, but that's why affordability. If we had to give everyone $1 million a year, Iain, that might not be, that affordable. No, By the way, just to quickly finish, the work part is important because people who work obviously pay income tax. And so that figures into the affordability.
Obviously I was joking about the million, but there was a serious point behind it because unless it is at a certain level, it's almost pointless doing, I would have thought. Rachel Johnson.
I think that in the short term, it's out of the question. There are stories coming out of America where Joe Biden's been cutting big checks for people to not work. And there is not an unemployment crisis, there's an employment crisis. They're not finding the workers to come and do the jobs, especially in hospitality and all that sort of sector. Long term, I think that Linda may have a point, but we'll need to see the rollout of automation, and that's going to be decades down the line, I suggest. I do think workers, national income tax receipts will fall hugely. In a way, what I think we've seen is furlough has been an early experiment in a universal basic income. And there is a hiring crisis now. So I don't think the call is correct in saying we're having an unemployment crisis. I think furlough has created on both sides of the Atlantic, actually more of an employment crisis, but in the lower paid sectors. I think in the future, I defer to Linda. But as you say, Iain, Finland brought it in and it dumped it off. I don't think it's a particularly British way. But as Michael points out, in terms of affordability, the free money doesn't have to be paid for anyway. So why not just throw more money around?
Michael, the bond fairies can make a return.
Yes. I'm glad Linda mentioned shortening hours as well. It seems to me that if you talk about universal basic income, in the same breath, you have to talk about some minimum guarantees about the what consists of a working week. And if I was a trade unionist, I'd be always linking the two. And I'd make a demand in order to lower the amount of time that is ordinary time before you get overtime, that is, so that also the jobs were, if there is a labour shortage or the other way, that somehow or other there's unemployment, which our caller thought there was, that either way, that what we do is we guarantee at any rate a minimum and, if you like, a maximum required amount of work statutorily, but also with a universal basic income, and those should be minimum demands, I would hope, of the Labour Party. But anyway, that's just me sitting on the wing saying that.
Shabnam.
I think we probably agree on this again, that it probably isn't something that we could implement in this specific time. Although the furlough scheme has been sort of a pilot example of the UBI system. I think it's a lovely initiative, but to be honest, it would make people more unwilling to work. From friends and people that I know who've been on the furlough scheme over the last a year or so, the willingness to get back and the motivation, the competition to work is sort of starting to die down. And I agree with Rachel, this isn't the British way. The system here in the UK is made on opportunity, it's on working hard to get to sort of different places. And it's that sort of that enthusiasm to get far, and introducing something like the universal benefit initiative is just not income system. It would probably not be something that someone like me would aspire to get to apply for or get into. And I understand that the fact that there have been lots of job vacancies in the hospitality industry, pubs and restaurant owners are starting to complain on shortages. But I think once the lockdown does ease, that will start to increase once again. People will want to get into work, and there will be a thirst for more jobs. We've just got to ride this out, I guess.
Michael, did you want to come back there?
No, that's all right. That's fine. I think you've got more agreement than you had anticipated there, Iain.
I know. This is another episode of Don't Get Very Cross Question, which I'm sure is a good thing in some ways. Simon, I'm not going to come back to you because we're running out of time, and you kind of said what you thought about the subject at the beginning, so thank you very much. Final text question from Davina in Ashford. I want to put a bet on the winner of Euro 2020. Who's your top tip, and why should I believe you? Well, Michael, you seem to be the most articulate football fan among our panel tonight, so I'm going to come to you first, which will lead... Rachel's horrified at that, which will leave the others time to think of their answer.
My son has commanded me to say Allez les Bleus to support France. So he loves Mbappe. So I tend to trog along like a faithful dog behind my 16-year-old. So I'm saying Allez les Bleus, Allez la France.
How very unpatriotic of you.
I know.
Shabnam.
I'm not really a football enthusiast. I don't really follow it unless it is the Euro Cup or the World Cup. But on this occasion, I'm going to say Britain. Yeah, definitely.
No. England or Wales or Scotland. You can't. There isn't a British team, Shabnam.
That's a lot about my knowledge on football.
Linda.
England. Of course.
Well, for once, we do seem to have a bit of a chance. Rachel?
All right, I'm going to throw a spanner in the works. I'm going to say Germany.
Yeah, because they always do it in the end, don't they?
Who I want to win. I'm saying who I think will win.
Yes.
Okay?
And why would that be, Rachel? Why do you think Germany will
you
win?
are testing the depths of my knowledge too far now, Iain.
Well, it won't take long, will it?
No. Germany always wins.
Right.
I think we better France do win sometimes, as my son.
Actually, France are the new Germany, if you see what I mean. Thank you very much to our panel, Rachel Johnson, Michael Rosen, Linda Yueh and Shabnam Nasimi. Tomorrow, let me tell you who is on the panel tomorrow, which I should have done before now. It's just instantly trying to get it up on the screen in time. We have the Observer columnist Sonia Soda, Anna Mikhailova from the Mail on Sunday, Labour MP Barry Gardner, and the former Conservative Education Secretary Damien. Oh no, that's Wednesday, isn't it? See, that's what happens when I don't get this up on the screen immediately. Damien Hines. But tomorrow it's Salma Shah, the Conservative commentator, Suzanne Moore, former Mail on Sunday columnist, Jackie Smith, you know her from the For the Many podcast, and the author of a biography of Rachel Johnson's brother, Tom Bauer. In a moment, we're going to talk about Ollie Robinson, the England cricketer who has been suspended by the English Cricket Board for racist tweets that he sent out at the age of 18. We will go to the news now. It's 9:01. This is LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Rebel MPs have secured an emergency debate over cuts to Britain's overseas aid budget. Earlier, the Speaker ruled out an attempt to amend unrelated legislation to require the government to restore the commitment to spend 0.7% of national income on aid. But the Commons has now backed a 3-hour debate tomorrow. Shabnam Nasimi, a Conservative activist, told LBC's Cross Question